Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for today's HCAOA and CareSwitch webinar series. I'm excited to welcome you back to part two of our series, Removing Roadblocks to Revenue, Key Lessons to Help Emerging Agencies Grow. And as you know, we'll have two more parts to the series, and those will be coming up in the following Wednesdays in the month of February. Want to remind you quickly of a couple of things that we have coming up here. If you are an HCAOA member and you have not yet renewed your membership for 2023, there's still time. If you have any issues or questions about renewing your membership, please feel free to reach out to us at info@hcaoa.org. I'd be happy to help you get that taken care of. Also coming up, we have the Home Care Pulse benchmarking survey that's now open. The deadline for that is February 28th. That is quickly approaching. So please check out our website or the Home Care Pulse website for more information on that. Also coming up, a very exciting event, our National Home Care Advocacy Day is coming up in the latter part of March. We will be hosting that in Washington, D.C. You can see the address and all of the logistics information for that on our events calendar at our website at hcaoa.org. We have got great attendance and registration so far. So if that is something that you'd be interested in joining us, we would encourage you to register for that as soon as possible so that we can begin to make appointments and meetings with legislators and get your logistics completed for that event. So if you do have any questions, as always, reach out to us at info@hcaoa.org, and we hope to see you there. Also want to thank CareSwitch once again for being our partner on these webinar series. As you see, they have some information in front of you on your screen regarding some of the tools and great resources that they offer. CareSwitch uses a pricing model called freemium, and it's the base version is free and you can pay for additional upgrades and options. CareSwitch gives you everything that you need to run your business for free, scheduling, notes, communication, documentation, and so much more. For example, some additional features that they have are home care owner FAQs. They have a team of educators and home care experts that are able to answer some of your most burning questions. And these things are updated on their website very often, so please feel free to check back for those things. And then also they have Home Care U, which is designed to be the home care management school that you didn't know that you needed. So please check out their website for more information on that. And that brings us to our topic today. Session two here is all of the home care operations questions that you're too afraid to ask. And I know we'll be diving into a lot more of those in greater detail today. I want to introduce you to our speakers. First, we have Jonathan Chapman. Welcome, Jonathan. He's a customer education over at CareSwitch. He's the director of customer education and former head of franchisee training at Synergy Home Care Corporate. Welcome. And then also we have Miriam Allred, who's over partnerships at CareSwitch. She is industry podcast host, home care partnerships thought leader, and aspiring future Vicky Hoke. So with that, I will turn it over to both Jonathan and Miriam.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andrea and the HCAOA for having us. Like she mentioned, this is session 2 of an event series that we're doing. Last week, we set the bar really high with Rachel Gartner at CareWork. We hope we can bring the energy and bring the excitement and education today. So engage with us, be present. We want to get the conversation started in the chat. So find that chat button here in Zoom. Let us know where you're joining from and how long your agency has been in business. We're super curious to see, who's on live with us and what stage you all are in. Just for context, we plan this event series with new owners in mind, but I'm sure we've got some established owners on the call as well. So if you've been in business for 2, 3, 4, 10 years, know that there's something here for you as well. And we want you to share your expertise and knowledge as we go. So engage with us in the chat. Let's make this interactive and fun for all. So setting the stage for today, looking at our agenda here, we're going to cover about 10 topics that most owners will be asking themselves or encountering probably in your first 6 months in business, but it's not uncommon if you're in your first, second, or third year to be asking yourself these questions as well. So that's why we're here today to talk about these topics, and know that usually with our Care Switch events, we go really deep on maybe one or two topics. Today's going to look a little bit differently, where we're covering about 10 topics and going what I like to think of maybe knee deep. You know, we're not going to go totally deep, but we're going to get to the point where we can get tactful and answer your questions. But we're going to move pretty fast and we're going to cover a lot of ground. So be prepared to take notes. And yes, this is recorded. And yes, we'll share the slides afterward. So the three areas that we're going to cover today are staffing, profit margins and owner compensation, and care delivery. So three different buckets that we're going to cover today. So Jonathan, if you're ready, let's go ahead and jump into staffing.
Yeah,
So
thank you, Miriam.
yeah, take it away. Let's talk about staffing.
Well, hello, everyone, all the HCOA members, so excited to be here. Really, why I'm so excited is this whole community, everyone loves really sharing what, they have done that's gone well and things that they wish would have changed. And Miriam and I have been fortunate enough to have met and spoken with so many agency owners over the years. And we've had the opportunity to hear them speak about just that, what's really brought them success for their business, as well as things that they wish they would have done differently. And that's what we're really hoping to do today, is especially for those of you first starting out, to be able to share some of that knowledge. And I did see in the chat too, there's several people that have been doing this for several years. So please, by all means, for any of these topics that we're covering, jump in, because there's people eagerly reading what you're saying and going, you know what, that's really great. I'm gonna implement that into my business. So for our first topic, we're talking about staffing. So jumping right in, what roles should you hire for in your home care agency's office staff? And then also, when should you hire them? There's so many, when they're first starting out, they're thinking, okay, I got to hire some caregivers. Maybe I'll just do it all myself. I'm sure, I think I saw some people that are doing this 7, 8, 9 years. If you can reiterate in the chat, definitely don't take on everything when you're first starting out. Typically, you're going to be putting on a lot of hats, but when you're starting your home care agency, it's really, really important that all these key roles and their specific responsibilities are addressed on day one. So when you're starting out, typically it may be you and then a small number of folks with you that are wearing these multiple hats. So maybe you and one other person, maybe 2 other people. And really what's important about this is, and I mentioned about the multiple hats business, because as you're growing, you're going to kind of take that hat and then have a full-time person taking on those. So depending on your state as well, this is one thing I always like to mention is that's important too. There are certain stipulations that you may need to have a nurse on staff. So just, that's important to take note that not everyone has the same regulatory type of stipulations, but all those roles are listed for you here now. And this is pretty typical across the board. They sometimes have different names, because you might have a client care coordinator, you might have a salesperson, you might have a marketer, you might, they name, it could be a community liaison, there's all these different names, but this is typically what you're going to see. And each of them have very specific responsibilities. So you're here listed, for those of you that are the agency owners, I would assume that majority of the attendees are that, with all of your responsibilities as the business owner. And then what we also have listed here is the director of operations. So they're going to oversee our operations. They're going to develop policies. They're going to provide support to staff, overseeing client care, and closely monitoring all those associated key performance indicators. Now, you may even take over that role right in the beginning. So you're going to be taking that administrator owner role. And then on top of that hat, you're also having the director of operations. So, but what also you'd be having here as well, you could have your, your HR manager / recruiter role. They're going to be hiring, training, managing all of your caregiver staff. You also have the scheduler, client care manager, all these other various roles that we see listed here. And then lastly, the intake coordinator, that being the person addressing all those phone calls and communication needs. So depending on where everyone is at here, for those of you that are under 500 hours, that's pretty good benchmark. Typically, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to see people with, 1 to 2 full-time employees. And, kind of the best recommendation when you're starting out is to have these roles divide up in a way that makes the most sense. So you don't want to have someone that's doing scheduling that's also doing the home assessments, because, they're going to be out of the office and stuff. So that being, having one person handling all in-office responsibilities, So all the scheduler responsibilities, all the intake coordinator responsibilities, that's going to really make the most sense. And, you can in the chat, if you'd like to validate that that's how you started out, especially when you were smaller, feel free to do so too. And, the other full-time employee as well, thinking about they're going to take on all those out of office responsibilities. So going and seeing all the client care stuff. So going out in the field, conducting the home assessments, maybe they're also recruiting and training new caregivers as well, because that's going to be a good way for everything to kind of flow. And then you can take care of the bookkeeping, you can take care of the payroll, you can also meet with those new potential referral partners. And, so as you're continuing to grow, you're getting new clients, you're passing that 500 threshold. Really, once you've passed that, a good move is to kind of split maybe that scheduler and intake coordinator role, because scheduling, and a lot of you can attest to this, it is easily the role that is most prone to burnout. You're dealing with call outs, you're dealing with excuses, you're dealing with a lot of stuff that's really challenging. So making sure that that person that takes on that role isn't getting overwhelmed. So that's one area that's pretty key that you can kind of separate. But another good move too is maybe thinking about, maybe you're going to split or potentially hiring a full-time recruiter, because recruiting is key. You don't want to neglect that. You want to be addressing applications right away. So it really depends on the strategy you want there. And as you continue to add, let's say, another 500 schedule hours, you're going to continue to separate those roles to newly created full-time positions. And really where this leads us to is to the full-time marketer role, because that's the one I know that typically would get a lot of the questions, because, the owner is doing all of the referral partner relationship stuff. When do I hire a full-time marketer? So by the way, we should also share too, we are monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions on the topics that we have, by all means, shoot in the chat. We'll pause and capture those. If not now, we'll do it at the end of the, but getting into the, Miriam, anything you wanted to add?
I was just going to say, to engage people in the chat, everyone drop in who was your first hire other than caregivers. I'm super curious to know. Every agency, like Jonathan's saying, looks a little bit differently, but who was your first hire in the office staff? Oh, awesome. Erica, scheduler RNs, client care managers, office managers. So this is exactly what we're talking about. Every agency looks a little bit different. And I just want to expound on what you're saying here, Jonathan, in that every owner comes to this business with different skill sets. So there's no wrong answer on who you hire first. My recommendation is hire where your gaps are, hire for your weaknesses. Say you're an owner that's really good at community outreach and the sales aspect is your strength. Great. No need to hire a salesperson right off the bat. Don't feel this pressure that that's what people do and you need to do that. Or say finances or taxes are your weak spot. Bring on an administrator or outsource with a CPA or an EA that can take that load off of you. So be mindful of your weaknesses and address them and hire to fill some of those gaps. Just wanted to interject with that. Jonathan, back to you.
It's a really good point, Miriam, because, I'd have sometimes when I was doing new franchisee training, a lot of people were extremely nervous about doing sales. They were brought into this business because they love care. Maybe they had a personal story because of a relative. And the thought of going out and doing those sales meetings terrified them. So certainly you can have somebody that you can hire to take care of that responsibility. But if you love that, you have a different gap, you can hire for that. So it's a really, really good strategy, as Miriam said. And it's something that I think a lot of small business owners do. Oh, and I see that there was just a quick question. If we can repeat what you said about the number of full-time employees based on weekly billable hours, a good threshold to think about is 500. That's typically what we see, is that as you keep hitting that 500 number, a lot of folks will think about adding a role. So when you're first starting out, between 0 to 500 hours, you may have between 1 to 2 full-time employees. But once you hit 500 scheduled hours, you're hitting where it's going to be really busy. The phone's probably going to ring a lot. You have clients or their family members calling. You have a number of tasks, and also not neglecting your recruiting efforts and your retention efforts for your existing employees. So all of that starts to become too much for the 1 to 2 folks. So, and that's per week.
Per week. And I would add, not necessarily that this is the rule, but kind of a rule of thumb is like 500-hour threshold ongoing. So that first 500 hours, like Jonathan said, you're going to hear the phones are going to be ringing. You're going to get to this point of like, I need help. Even the 1,000-hour mark, then the 1,500-hour mark, then the 2,000-hour mark. I think 500 is a good rule of thumb to like analyze where you're at and the workload and consider if it makes sense to bring someone on every 500 hours, broken down by these different roles that we're mentioning, but that's usually, the threshold.
Exactly. And, revenue is important too. But as we know in this industry, everyone goes by hours. You talk about your 24/7 clients, you talk about, the shifts, and everything is related to hours. So that's why, we're putting in that way, because it's a good way to kind of measure it. And also it makes the most sense because we all live in those schedules. We see, with the shifts and the looking at calendars and everything. So that's really important.
Yeah. Should we move to the next slide? Someone's asking about sales rep, and that's
Yeah.
literally where
Mhm.
we're headed, because this is one of the most common questions that new owners will be asking,
Mhm.
when do I bring on a marketer? What do I pay them? How do I pay them? All of that good stuff. So let's dive in here, Jonathan.
Exactly. And, we wanted to provide you all really specific stuff here, because instead of going, when it feels right, no, here it's, at what point should you hire a marketer for your business? A really good rule to think about is, when your annual revenue is about 1.5 million, or you have that 1,000 billable hours. So again, that 500 threshold, you're hitting the second one. That's going to be a really good indicator that, I need somebody to take this on full time, especially if you're the one that's been doing this previously. Also, for this role, in terms of compensation, you're looking at, on average, a base salary around 40 to 70,000 with an incentive of 0.3 to 0.6% of your revenue. And again, this is a rough average, and of course depends highly on where your business is located. But their total compensation goals up to 25 to 40% of their their commission goals of their compensation. So, at this point, it's really important that when it comes to your referral partners, that, they're going to require ongoing communication, and they're going to need that continued nurturing. And if you're not able to do so, which, when we're hitting 1.5 million of revenue, more than likely, you just don't have time for that. There's too much in your business that you're needing to do. So you need to delegate these things out. You're going to want to continue to invest the time in strengthening those relationships, and you more than likely won't be able to do that yourself. So that's when it's time to hire a marketer. And, you really want to continue to also search for new opportunities. Sometimes people, because of prior roles, they may have had a relationship, let's say, with a skilled nursing facility or rehab facility, and that's maybe where some of their early on referrals are coming from. But you always want to search for new referral partnerships. They're always out there, and there can be circumstances that can cause that one referral partner relationship to dry up. So having someone that's fully dedicated to fostering those relationships is really going to be key. So, and also you need to have a sales plan that they're executing. So that's just really to give you all some numbers on the marketer in specific. So
Super, super helpful. I want to read this comment from Chaim in the chat. I know I'm butchering that, and I'm not even going to attempt your last name. This person is saying, I always suggest hire the next person before you fully need them. Meaning, if you have one full-time employee and need, a second, hire the second and don't wait until you fully need the second. That is great advice. It's so easy to wait until you need someone, but by that point, it's probably too late, and the time it takes to train and vet and get that person up to speed could take weeks or months. So I love that advice. So thanks for sharing that. The other thing that I wanted to add on this slide, Jonathan, you kind of touched on it. 40 to 70,000 is a pretty big range. So do a local competitive analysis, jump on LinkedIn or jump on Indeed. They've got all the localized salary information on there. See what others in your area are paying for similar sales type positions with similar role and responsibilities, and find what's competitive in your area. This doesn't have to be a guessing game. We have 40 to 70 on here as a range, but that's a big range. So don't guess and just, throw something out there, but do some homework and find what's competitive in your local area and be as competitive as you can. But also, we're going to get to this in a minute, in your job posting, talk about the incentives, talk about the commission structure, talk about the benefits, so that if your salary is a little bit lower and you can't compete 100%, make sure you're highlighting all of those other benefits and incentives for this role.
And thanks for pointing that out, Miriam. Like what Chaim said, you have to really think about not only, because we're going to talk in a moment about how to attract talent, but then you also have to think about how you're going to retain them. Because if you're hiring someone and things are chaotic, they're not going to have a really great onboarding experience. So you want to hire early before the work becomes too much, because it's like, okay, I got 20 minutes for you to learn this scheduling software, and okay, and go. It's going to be really rough, and they're not going to be able to really perform well, and it's going to cause them a lot of stress. So if you're hiring early, everyone can kind of have the bandwidth to do training and onboard people. That's really best. And another thing too, someone mentioned about, and I think it's important. You're a small business owner. And there can be real fears, like you can be burned. There can be, because someone was mentioning just a moment ago about if you hire a marketer and if they leave, what can happen. But the thing though is that they, like, while they're developing a relationship with that marketer, they also are developing a relationship with your agency and those caregivers that are providing those great patient outcomes. So they're going to want to continue that. And by all means, I don't want to get into too much of the bad stories, because trust me, I've heard tons of them of, staff leaving or people taking client lists and all kinds of stuff. That does happen in this industry. It can certainly happen where you have caregivers, you can have office staff leaving for competitors, all of that. You really, what you want to focus on instead of that kind of stuff is really having those great relationships with those referral partners and delivering great results. Also for the family members too, because even if someone leaves, like, yeah, but I've been with such and such agency, and and that's what really drives that loyalty. So hopefully that addresses a little bit of the fear that was kind of addressed there.
Yeah, I like what Beth said here in the chat as well. I'm eating up this chat, so keep it coming. Beth said, do ride-alongs with your marketer, whether that's you as an owner or one of your other administrative staff, once a month or once a quarter, tag team it, go out there to the referral sources with your marketers so that there's two faces, there's more interaction. And like you said, they're building a relationship with your agency and with your brand, and not just with the individual sales rep that's there. So love your insights in the chat, Beth. Let's move on to the job posting. So last week we went really deep with Rachel Gartner on job postings for caregivers. Like most of you will see pretty quickly, these job postings for your administrative staff are equally as important, and what you include in them is really important, because like we all know right now, the job market is competitive and it's intense. And so how you craft your job ads is really important. So there's a lot here on the screen. Don't be overwhelmed. Jonathan, let's just kind of talk through the highlights of this job ad.
Well, just to break it down, because, there's a sea of these job ads. And one thing I've kind of noticed too, sometimes in home care, people sometimes almost inadvertently operate in a bubble where they forget that we're existing and competing against all different types of industries, whether that's for our caregivers or our office staff and what have you. So the most important thing is, and you can see it in bold at the very, very top, is that headline, as well as your hook. This applies. It's the same thing I'm sure that was talked about, with the ads for caregivers. We talked a little about that, but also, what can they expect working at your agency? You want to draw in those office staff. It's not about listing, okay, do you have these qualifications? Because if you don't even talk to me. No, it's really about drawing them and build, and addressing those responsibilities. You can see it later on about, building partnerships with those referral sources, conducting other, community outreach. All that's going to be important. Exactly. So Glenn just talked about what's in it for me. That's what's going to draw them in. So I know it's a little hard. You might have to, in Zoom at the top, you can kind of zoom in a little bit. But what it says is, you're an ambitious, outgoing sales professional who wants a career that will grow with them. We're a fast-growing business that needs the right person to help us solidify a relationship in the community and create additional pipelines of referrals that drive new business. That excites me. Just reading that, I'm just getting jazzed hearing about that. Where do I sign up? So that's going to be really key. And this also, you can translate this to the other roles, whether it's a scheduler, whether it's client care, tapping into what you think, people that you're looking for, what types of qualities, what would motivate them and get them excited about the role. So those are just kind of some important things to take note. And then also you're listing all the benefits, if I were to work for you, and then being transparent about the pay. What is the compensation structure? That's going to be especially important for people that are drawn towards sales roles. So making sure that you have that listed.
I just want to emphasize, and I will die on this hill of put pay on your job ads. No exceptions. People deserve to know you have nothing to hide. Be honest from the get-go. Go and rewatch Rachel's session about, putting pay on your caregiver job ads. Don't be afraid if your rates are lower. We understand. But it's so important to be transparent and upfront from the get-go, and it starts with your job ads. So one other thing to know on Indeed, if you don't add the pay, it'll generate an educated guess. So it'll put a range or a guess that it thinks, which can be dangerous or misleading. So know that if you don't identify and put the pay on there very transparently, then Indeed will generate that for you, which is dangerous. So I just want everyone to take away that you should and absolutely should put your pay on your job ads. Don't be afraid, but be transparent from the get-go.
Perfect.
So yeah, I'm also just reading the comments in the chat. This is so awesome. Anything else to talk about on staffing, Jonathan, before we move on to the next topic?
No, I think that's pretty good. And, any additional things, feel free to, I was just looking at the chat as well, like lots of great conversation happening there. Yeah. I think if we're ready, I think we should go on to topic 2, just for time's sake, to make sure we're covering everything that we wanted to hit on. Another thing to talk about too is the profit margin and owner's compensation. This can be a little tricky because, some people go into this business because they have a big heart and they really, feel passionate about this, or, this is something that is kind of a blind spot. Some of this, business type stuff, maybe you had a different type of role and now you're going out and doing this on your own. When you are first starting out, you're likely investing everything back into the business. So, however, we want to be able to provide you all a range of what we're typically seeing. So, what we're seeing here when it comes to specifically to profit margins is about 35 to 50%. And that's pretty typical. And note that this can totally depend on your clients and whether you're typically private pay, if you're Medicaid, if you're VA, all that really depends on the type of clients that you're taking in. And in addition, when it comes to your pay, 10 to 15% of an owner's cut is typical. And this is, if you're at the stage where you're reliant on your business to support you financially and that the business has gotten off the ground, that's pretty typical. But, you really as a goal, for those of you that are 1, 2, 3 years, and for all the people that have been doing this 7, 8, 9, 10 years, you can kind of chime in here and share with others, where you've been at or where you kind of started, because you want to aim for that 50% gross profit margin, and as well as that 15% owner's cut. That's a long-term goal. These numbers are important as well if your intention or, eventual goal is to sell your agency, because, a lot of people will go into this with, I want to build this business and then I eventually want to sell it. So that's important too, when you're looking to sell your business. But for the newer agencies, totally fine, totally acceptable having, that 35% gross profit margin, as well as a 10% owner's cut. That's completely typical. And those of you that are in the very, very early stages, most will aim to take as little as possible out of the business for at least maybe the first 2 years. Because I did see some in the chat earlier that were maybe their first or second year, if not longer, so they can invest it back into the business. So it's really depends on your intentions, what you like to do with the business. But these are the numbers that just important things to take away.
I wanted to add a couple of things. Some of you may be asking, where did we get these numbers? And I'll address it plain and simple: conversations with owners, and namely a few on the HCAOA board. Shout out to Jeff Weiberg. Um, Between Jonathan and I, we've talked to hundreds, if not thousands, of owners across the country. And so these are the ranges that we hear most often. And I want to just reiterate and emphasize what you said, Jonathan. If you're above or below these numbers, just be aware. Know that these are ranges, and that if you are not in here exactly, it's okay. And the other thing I want to add is be conscious of sustainability. If you're way above or way below, this might be good to reassess and take a deep dive, looking at your balance sheets and looking at your line items to know, okay, this is where we need to cut back, or this is where we need to go, up. Just be really conscientious of these numbers early on. And, as you progress through your business, always be watching these two numbers so that you don't, end up on one of the extremes.
Exactly. And, you didn't get into this business to buy yourself a job. You're doing this to grow your business. So, that's why it's important to know these numbers and, so that you can be successful and know what other people that have been successful, where they started out too. I did see a specific question. I'm going to try to tackle it, but I'm probably going to defer to people that are a little bit more educated this, because I'm definitely not a CPA or anything, but or an attorney. But there's something about the best legal structure to get paid a salary. I know I typically see agencies as an LLC, but I would definitely recommend, if you don't already have an accountant or an attorney, that you definitely need to, as a small business owner, Jim, just to make sure that you're getting the right business advice on that. Because I can certainly answer operations questions, but that might, I don't want to give me.
I can jump in on that too, Jim. Plug for our podcast at CareSwitch. It's called go to homecareu.careswitch.com. We just did a deep dive on business structures with Mark Johnson at America Tax Solver. So he's an EA, and we just went really deep on business structure, because that dictates how you pay yourself. And like Jonathan said, that's not really our area of expertise, but we just did like a Tax 102 session on that, which goes into how you pay yourself based off your business entity. So look that up, Jim, and anyone else that's curious. I was under the similar impression as Jonathan. A lot of agencies that we see and work with are LLCs, but it's not uncommon to have an S Corp or a Corp or a proprietorship. There's a lot of other options out there, and how you get started is really important, but also there's opportunities to switch based off your success and how you're doing. So that's a topic for another day. But we just covered that in another session. So look into that. I want to move on to the next slide if we're ready, and talk a little bit about break even and doing a break even analysis. Do you want to talk about this, Jonathan?
Yeah. And if you don't mind, Miriam, while I'm talking about this, a couple of people have asked about the link to Home Care U. No sign-in info. You can just hop in there. There's also plenty of other questions too at FAQ.careswitch.com. Lots of experts throughout the industry have chimed in on various number of topics. So really great information there as well. So when it comes to understanding, you're charging your clients, you're hiring staff, one important thing to note is a break even, and be able to do a break even analysis. What's great about this is we actually have a break even spreadsheet for you to make this easy, because we're asking you, how do you easily calculate how much you need to charge to break even? So what you can do with this, again, because Miriam's providing some of these links, and we have one at the FAQ page as well. You need to monitor and enter in, your expenses, your caregiver pay, your weekly hours per client, the billing rate. After you're entering all of this, and you'll be able to get a clear picture of how many clients you'll need to break even. And this can be fine-tuned, because you could potentially, let's say that your referral partner is maybe a hospice, in-home hospice company, and the majority of your clients are 24/7 clients, and you charge at a certain rate. Or maybe you provide staffing at a skilled nursing facility, or you do shorter shifts or longer shifts, what have you. But all of this varies. because there's all these little tweaks and things that you can make when it comes to that. And what this spreadsheet will do is help you understand where it's like, I need at least this to break even. So again, thank you again for, all the experts that we have on our home care FAQ page. We do have this one was provided by Julio from Brian's Consulting. So be sure to check that out. And thanks again, Miriam, for posting that so they can easily access that.
Yeah, absolutely. The only thing I'll add here is don't be intimidated if this isn't your strength. If balancing the books and keeping up with your balance sheet and managing your finances isn't your strength. A lot of owners come to this industry with a clinical background. And so some of these business operations and business finances aren't your strength. And know that you're not alone. I'm sure if we said, let us know in the chat if that's you, we would get a lot of hands raised. But we want to provide you the resources, at least to have a good understanding. You've got to start somewhere and you've got to have kind of a baseline knowledge. But like we talked about earlier, hire someone that this is their strength, or work with a local CPA that can, explain some of this to you in detail and be that resource that you need to make educated decisions about your business. Like Jonathan mentioned, I just dropped this spreadsheet in the chat. You literally can download that and use it to start tracking some of these expenses and these line items in your own business. Start somewhere. Don't be intimidated and don't just say, I can't do this. But make it a strength and hire good people around you that can help you with some of these gaps in your business.
Because you may be drawn towards, I love doing the home care assessments. I love training caregivers. I love doing all of that stuff. As we talked about it earlier at the top of the hour, these roles that we mentioned, all of them have to be addressed. And this is one of those things that can't be overlooked. So you want to make sure that you know exactly what you should be charging and all of your overhead, and to make sure that, because you need your business to be profitable. So
yeah. So on that note, let's get into our third topic, which is care delivery. We've talked a little, quite a bit about operations and more like tactful things. I want us to talk about care delivery because there's going to be some questions that we're about to address that you have early on that are not the most fun to deal with, but it's the reality of it. And we're going to hit some of those today. So Jonathan, do you want to preface this topic a little bit more?
Yes. Well, really, I always like to talk about the fact that, as a small business owner, you're putting your blood, sweat, and tears into this. And you can't but help take it personally when, somebody really does make a big mistake, especially, sometimes I would talk about some of the horror stories because I think it's important to know what happens. It's not on a regular basis, but it's important to kind of know this could potentially happen and how you should take action. So, whether it's dealings with, theft or people making mistakes or a number of different things. And just know that service failures happen to everyone. They're inevitable and they happen with every single home care agency. Even, the really great ones, the ones that, are the masters that have the 5 million, in revenue, they happen, and clients and their family members, they can understand this. And what they will tolerate, though, when it comes to, those little slip ups, what they won't be okay with is if you don't make the mistake right. So the steps that you take when they have that poor experience really can prevent it from tarnishing your business, because you can't but help. I mean, this is your brand. This is your business. You're doing everything you can. And when people make a mistake, sometimes I even, would tell other franchisees or other agency owners, stories where a caregiver just they brought a client to a restaurant, one that had dementia. And then I guess there was some sort of emergency and they just left the client there. And, the restaurant staff was unable to really kind of locate. They eventually found them and but there was like a whole process that the agency had to kind of go through to really recover that. Another story, there was a family member that arrived home. When they came inside their parents' home, the caregiver was asleep on the couch, and this was a 24/7 client. So a number of things that are really important. But what we have listed here is if those things happen to you, and more likely you're going to come across them. There's 4 critical things to note. The first is allow and give clients a straightforward way, as well as their family members, a way to voice their issues. So whoever is in charge of client care, they need to be building those really strong relationships with the client and the family member to be able to report these issues, and that they're comfortable bringing it up. Because you may at first feel defensive or upset that this was brought up to you, but know that this is really great. This is a good thing when they complain or when they bring up an issue, because they could have not told you and gone to another business. The fact that they're telling you is that they value the service that you're providing and they want to continue to do business with you. So make sure that you're doing those regular quality assurance calls, as well as those quality assurance visits. Create, an atmosphere with your clients and their family members that they know that they can voice concerns, and that, when you hear those client concerns, you're going to solve those problems. And if, the quicker that you address them, the higher chance of, it being okay. The second thing really is about demonstrating empathy. So, they need to feel validated in how that experience impacted them. So, to demonstrate empathy, listen to them, verbally acknowledge what they're feeling to provide that validation. Certainly apologize for the service mishap. And you're not assigning or denoting blame at this time. It's really just, expressing regret that it happened. And then lastly, offer that solution to the problem to really show that you're going to research this matter to get to the root cause. Especially, if someone says, I had an item stolen or something like that, I'm going to look into this right away. The third check mark we have here is to empower your staff. It's so easy for a lot of agency owners to want to just handle it. I got it. What you don't realize is what can happen is, your intake coordinator or anyone else that's involved is, I do apologize. The owner's unavailable at this time, but I'll leave them a message. You don't want to do that. You don't want your staff to do that. You want to empower your staff to feel good about and about solving all of these issues, because your staff does care about these positive care experiences. So when it comes to that service recovery process, you have that power, that ability to provide your employees with the autonomy to address them with clients, with family members when they bring it to their attention. And if you're not trusting your staff on how to correct those concerns, it really does prevent them from having those more meaningful and better experiences with the clients and their family members. So allow them, trust them to use resourceful problem-solving skills to be more empowered and really to create those good care experiences, even if something bad does happen. And then the fourth thing is really learn from the mistakes. Figure out how it happened and how that you can prevent it from occurring. It could be additional training. It could be a number of different things that could was the root cause of the issue. And also just know that when you're doing that research with the family members, that it's really going to build better relationships with your clients too, because they'll be able to trust you, knowing that if something does arrive, that you're going to address it right away.
Really good information. I want to learn from some of the attendees on live. How would you guys answer this question, or from experience, how do you handle service recovery if one of your caregivers has made a huge mistake? Comment in the chat what you would do or have done. While people are doing that, Jonathan, at the beginning, you mentioned some horror stories. Just when I think I've heard it all in home care, something new, something that you wouldn't even believe would happen or could happen does. And as much as I don't like to hear the horror stories, it's the reality of this business. And you have to make a plan as to how you're going to address these issues before they happen. So for any of you owners listening, if you think that that's not going to happen to you, just wait. Something is going to happen and you need to have a plan, a premeditated plan as to how you're going to handle that before it does. And the thing on this list that resonates most with me is empowering your staff. Like you said, Jonathan, as an owner, it's so easy to want to handle it, but you have to build trust. You have to believe in and trust and give your staff the benefit of the doubt and the opportunity to thrive and to step up to the plate in these tough situations. And so it can be nerve-wracking, as you hire all these new people that may or may not have experience in home care, to trust them and empower them from the beginning, but make that a priority early on to develop that trust and develop that relationship so that they can be and feel empowered.
And, just to add to that, sometimes this does require terminated employees. Sometimes it requires additional training or kind of level setting expectations. So, and sometimes, it could be just, because I'm trying to find a polite way, that sometimes you have to talk through things with family members or with, because, there just may have been unrealistic expectations or what have you, but you really just want to be the mediator between it all. And then also just allowing them, like I mentioned earlier, is give them a way to have that relationship where that pathway where that if an issue arises that they can talk. If a really serious situation happens, that they can come to you with it and you address it. And that you're not the only one doing it, that your staff can really address these early on, because if something is ongoing and then someone comes to you and it was a long going problem, it's a lot harder to solve.
Yeah.
And lots of great advice in the chat too, Miriam.
Lots of great advice in the chat. I want to shout out Beth here. I'm less familiar with this method or methodology. She's saying that you use the feel, felt, found method. I know how you feel. I felt the same way. And I found that we're capable of fixing it. I really like that's simple and repeatable and, has that level of like empathy that we're talking about. Most of you owners have been in the shoes of a caregiver and have been in circumstances that they're facing. And so you can empathize with them and use that method that she's talking about of, you've been there, done that, felt that before, and together we can find a solution here. So awesome comments and ideas in the chat. Hope everyone's reading some of those. We're running down the clock here, Jonathan. So we've got two more things to cover in care delivery. So let's tackle this next one in just a couple minutes.
Sure. Well, this can be challenging too, because I'm sure lots of you have wonderful caregivers, the ones that you sing, their praises and say, oh, these are the best caregivers. Unfortunately, though, you're going to have some that are going to pose a lot of challenges. And, you all as business owners, you definitely understand the importance of caregivers that are, showing up to those shifts and they're arriving on time. And, unfortunately, it can be common that you have caregivers that can arrive to shifts late, or they're not completing all the tasks that are outlined in the client's plan of care, or calling out. Because call outs, that's the world of home care. That's pretty common. But really my suggestion when it comes to ensuring that all your caregivers show up on time, they're showing up to every shift, and they're adhering to the care plan. If you do these three things, it can really help. And the first thing is painting a clear picture of the impact. And I've always been vocal about when you're, for your employees, with your caregivers, share how important it is and the way that they are creating a positive impact on the community and to their clients, because they love caregiving. A lot of people that are in this, they do it because they like their clients. Your clients, they enjoy making, they have relationships with them. So you're really highlighting the impact, because they might not take it to the next step. Like, you were able to really help all these clients, and now they have gone from this is where they started and this is that. So you're painting that really great picture. So all your caregivers are really seeing the positive ways that when they show up, that the ways that they can really help people, that now their diet has improved, or their blah, blah, blah medication, or any of that, because you're monitoring those care plans and seeing the positive impact, share that with them. And then unfortunately, also, it's not as well understood when it comes to calling out and being late. A lot of folks can really see it as being harmless. And, what they may not really fully understand is that these clients, you all know this, that they're completely dependent upon this support. And it can cause a huge amount of stress when, for both the client as well as the family member. Even being 10 minutes late. I always joke about the fact that, if I ever have, need to see my grandparents, I'm early, because if I'm 5 or 10 minutes late, it's like, where are you? It's the same thing, with clients. That's very nerve-wracking. If it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes is so-and-so coming, and then they're probably going to call the office, and it's a whole thing. And when there's a call out, having to, reschedule things, the scheduler's having to do that, calling everybody up to ensure, oh, sorry, we have to shift your visit to tomorrow. That's a lot. That may not be a big deal, in their mind, but that's something that's really important. So have a clear dialogue with your employees about the positive ways that they can impact, and that can be very inspiring. And then also don't shy away from those conversations about how clients and family members can be negatively impacted by call outs, by tardiness, as well as inconsistent care. So that's really key. The second thing, Miriam, I saw you just wanted.
No, you're great.
Go
Keep
ahead.
going.
Oh, yeah, by all means, because I talk a lot, so feel free to jump in. The second thing too is you have so much power as the agency owner to drive the standard that you want with those key performance indicators, those KPIs and incentives. So have those consistent policies that people need to adhere to. It's easier to say this when I'm sure there's plenty of agency owners going like, I can't really afford to lose any caregivers. But you also need to know that when you have caregivers that are consistently calling out or are late, trust me that other caregivers are talking about it. They see it and they talk about it with each other. They're like, oh, I know Stacy, and oh, I know Bob, and they talk about that. And so when you have employees that you really don't adhere to a policy, they know they can get away with it. So making sure that you have, when it comes to attendance, there is some sort of policy for call outs. It needs to be within a certain threshold. They can't call out, an hour before a shift. Maybe it's 24 hours, maybe it's 8 hours, whoever your policy is. And by all means in the chat, let people know what your call out policy is, because there's some that maybe don't have one, which please have a call out policy. But it should have that certain time frame. They should communicate with someone in the office. No texting, can't come into my shift. They need to tell somebody. And that tardiness should not be allowed. That all of these things need to be followed up with some sort of progressive discipline. Whether it's a verbal warning or whatever, that needs to be all laid out. And we talked about earlier on, that director of operations role, if you're taking that on, or whomever, they need to develop those policies. That needs to be part of the new hire training. That needs to be talked about and well understood. And then also, if there's no calls, no shows, those need to be instant terminations. Unless there was some sort of emergency, no call, no shows can never be tolerated. So all of these things, tying them to the caregivers' KPIs, their reviews, maybe you have monthly or quarterly caregiver of the, whatever, a caregiver of the month, awards, all of that kind of stuff, incentives for picking up shifts, not calling out shifts, all of that's going to be really key. And then the last thing too is just with obstacles, you should have someone that's managing the caregivers, if not you. Make sure you're having open dialogues with them, because there could be situations that they maybe aren't as comfortable talking about. Maybe they have transportation issues. There's things like whether they're either afraid to talk about because they don't want to be confrontational, or maybe they're nervous because they don't want to complain, or maybe there's a sense of pride that they just don't want to talk about. But when you have those strong relations with your caregivers, they'll be able to kind of relay this and say, well, my school or my kid or my this or that, and being able to work with them. And it could be a training issue. There could be a reason that they weren't comfortable and, I don't know how to use a Hoyer lift and I didn't really want to talk about it. So that could be a reason why they're not addressing those care plans, or they're having some of the issues. So it could be, as I mentioned, maybe they're struggling with coordinating childcare. Maybe they have some transportation issues on certain days. Maybe they weren't properly trained on certain tasks and weren't comfortable performing them. If you approach these with compassion, you'll get a much, much, much better response.
Yeah.
So
I wanna call out what Michelle has said here in the chat. She says, we always say it doesn't matter how great the caregiver is. If they aren't there, they aren't great. That is black and white.
Yeah.
If they're not showing up, they're not showing up, no exceptions. And then she also mentions, they have a point system. After they have 3 points or 3 strikes, maybe they are considered for termination. So like Jonathan is saying, KPIs to track their attendance and, be honest with yourselves and be honest with them. Not showing up is not tolerable, and put a process in place that you can follow and repeat, as this happens ongoing. We're close on time here. So I want to make sure we can get.
I just want to add one thing though, Miriam, to interrupt just real quick, is just to add with incentives, make sure you're physically handing stuff to people. If you just add it to people's checks, a lot of times it can not be as well visible or known. If you're physically handing gas cards, if you're physically handing, this little Starbucks cards or whatever, that can have a lot more value than just putting stuff into people's paychecks. So just one thing I just wanted to add there. So go.
Yeah, no, that's great. Let's hit this last topic that's really important, which is, the need to fire a client. You will get to this at some point, and as hard as it is, especially for a new owner, you need to know how to handle this. So maybe in 60 seconds, Jonathan, can you cover what we have here?
I'll just be real brief here that it's really important as a good business person to be aware when a client's not a good fit, especially, if the family or client member is in any way harassing your staff, that's not going to work. And if also, we have here listed because, we want to thank Brett for sharing a lot of his expertise as an agency owner. He's also an HCOA board member. Be familiar with the 80-20 rule. If you're spending the majority of your time, like 80%, helping this one client, or maybe the daughter of the client or what have you, maybe it's time to say, I don't think that we're a good fit, and that it may be best to be served by another agency. The same thing too, you may be dealing with clients that, have an altered mental status, or, some care needs that make it very challenging for your caregivers. So just know that your caregivers, I'm sure all of you know this, but it's just a good reminder, your caregivers are the most precious resource. So if you have a client that's causing a lot of work and a lot of stress for your office staff or for your caregivers, know that it's okay to let them go, especially if it's just not a good fit. So,
yeah, that's
and
perfect.
Jim asked a really great question. If you fire a client, what time notice should you give them? I think two weeks is plenty. I think I've heard some do as short as a week. The only time you should abruptly end services is if it's something where, someone is getting abusive. And I'm sure there's plenty of that if you ask around, where a family member, comes and they were abusive to staff, and that cannot be tolerated, and then, or if you have a client that was doing something to your employees that was inappropriate, and they're, and it's reported, it's like, what, this is not going to work. I can't put my employees in a situation like this. So that would be really it. But if it's something where it's like, what, this really isn't, give it, you can do 1 to 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's great. We have covered a lot. Jonathan, you've been amazing. This has been an awesome session. I just want to reiterate a few quick things. We've covered a lot of ground, but if none else, take what's on this slide. Hiring a marketer, at these benchmarks, that profit margin and owner compensation, those are the rates to watch out for. What we just covered, when it comes to care delivery and firing a client, be cognizant of that 80-20 rule. Don't be strung along by a client that's not the right fit for you. So we hope this session has been really beneficial and informational, and we hope there's been something here for everyone. Just before I pass the mic back over to Andrea, I just want to let everyone know, Jonathan and I work for a company called CareSwitch. We're a newer scheduling software in the space. As you can see, we're super passionate about home care, and our software reflects that. Our software is free. If you're on pen and paper, there's no excuses anymore. This is a free option for you to build your care plans, documentation, EVV, schedule. All of that is for free in this software. So check us out, careswitch.com. We are here if you need us as a resource. And I just want to say, Andrea, thank you so much for letting us do this session today. We hope it's been really beneficial to everyone. And I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you both so much, Miriam and Jonathan, for sharing so much great information. My goodness, the chat was so valuable alone, just the discussions and things that were taking place. So thank you to each and every one of you for sharing such great insights as kind of the conversation just rolled along. If you have gotten this much out of just parts 1 and 2, I want to encourage you to register if you have not already for parts 3 and 4. As you see here on your screen, we have part 3 coming up next Thursday, February 16th at 2 p.m. Eastern. Once again, this is going to be on hard-earned leadership lessons from the top 3 home care leaders. I want to encourage you to register for that if you haven't already. And then towards the end of the month, we'll have how to be a caregiver recruitment crisis as well. So very, even more great sessions to come. Thank you again, Miriam and Jonathan, for sharing your heart and for sharing such great insights today. If any of you have any questions that were not answered today, please feel free to reach out to us at info@hcaoa.org, or you can reach over to the CareSwitch team. Miriam's email address is right there on the screen. Thanks again for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you on part 3 next week. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone. Take
everybody.
care.